Welcome to the VB Toolbox. In this tutorial we will be creating a very simple client-server application that will allow us to send messages across the network. Due to the complex nature of network programming, I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. So let's go ahead and get started creating our server. We're going to create a new project, and we'll make that a Windows Forms application, and you can call this TCP server or whatever you like. I'm just going to call mine server. And I'm going to start by adding a text box to my form to relay the text message from our chat program to the server. So let's find our text box control, and we'll want to make that multi-line. So if we go into the properties on the right, we can change the multi-line property to true. That'll allow us to expand that text box out. And I'm going to rename the text box as well. I'm going to call it TXT Chat. And that should give us a nice, simple form field to relay our chat messages to. So, with that, I'm going to add a class for our TCP control for actually managing our network or our server. So I'm going to right-click in the Solution Explorer on the project head and select Add a Class. And I'm going to name my class TCP Control. Click the Add button. That generates a new class template for us. And we're going to need access to a few different namespaces. Because we'll be using a network stream, we're going to need the system.io namespace. So I'm going to say imports system.io, and we're also going to need access to the .NET and sockets namespaces. So I'm going to say imports system.net and imports system.net.sockets, and that'll give us access to our TCP controls. Finally, we're also going to make this multi-threaded, so the messaging system will be handled in a separate thread from our form, thus keeping our form accessible and alive rather than being in sort of a frozen state just waiting for messages to arrive. So I'm going to import system.threading, and that should do it for our imports. Next up, we're going to add some server configuration properties. So I'm going to just call this server config, and I'm going to make public server IP. Our server needs a network address for our clients to connect to and communicate with it. So we're going to use the server's IP address as an IP address, and we'll just set that equal to IP address dot parse. And here you can enter whatever IP address your system is using, whatever IP address the server itself will be using. In my case, that is a local IP or an internal network IP of 10.0.0.253. And then we need to specify, that's all we need for the IP address. Okay, now we need to specify the server port, so I'm going to create a port variable. I'm going to call this server port as an integer equals I'm just going to set my IP or my port to 64555 You're probably going to want to set that to the upper port range somewhere. You don't want it conflicting with any other listening applications on your machine. So one application can only listen on a port at once. So we're going to open up 64555 for this application server, this server application. And now we need to define our actual server. So I'm just going to say public. You could probably set this to private, but actually, yeah. I'm going to set this to public, and this needs to be a TCP listener, okay? And once we initialize this TCP listener on this IP address and this port, our server will be active. Now, we're going to need to create a thread for our server to run on, our listener specifically. So I'm going to say private. I'm going to call this the comm thread since it'll be our communications thread. And that will just be a thread. And I'm also going to create a Boolean variable to tell the app whether the server is actually listening, actually set the listening state of the server. So I'm going to call this public is listening as Boolean, and I'm going to make sure that's a true value, so when it starts up it immediately sets the listening status to true. And now we need to define our clients. Okay, for this application, again, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, so I'm just going to make this a single client server, meaning that it's only going to accept a connection from a single client. In most chat programs, of course, you're going to want to have some sort of connection pool or a list of clients, some sort of collection, so multiple people can connect to your server. But again, just to keep this as simple as possible, I'm just going to create a single client. So I'm going to say private client, whoops, sorry, I'm typing, as a TCP client. Okay, and now we're going to need a data stream for that client. Once we initialize this data stream, we'll be able to send the messages back and forth. So I'll say private client data as a StreamReader. Okay, much like the file StreamReader, this can also read data from a network stream. Now we're going to create a new sub to initialize our server. So I'm going to say public sub new, and I won't supply any parameters. I'll just supply those from when I create an instance of our class. So I'm going to say we want to set the server to equal a new TCP listener, and we want to use the IP address and port that we defined above. So I'm going to say server IP, and for the port I want to use server port, and that'll create our server object. Then we actually have to start the server service, so we have to say server dot start, and as soon as that runs, it begins listening on that port. Okay, and once we have initialized our server, we want to begin the listener thread. Of course, we're going to have a sub to reference here, but we can go ahead and just prepare it. So I'm going to say comm thread equals new thread, and we're going to use a new thread start at the address of a sub we are going to call listening. Okay. whoops, it went ahead and threw in my variable here. I'm just going to comment this line out until we create our listening thread. And once our thread is created, we're going to have to start that as well. So I'm going to say comThread.start, and that initializes the thread and gets it rolling. So now we have to create the sub to run in that thread. So we're going to say private sub listening, and there will be no parameters for that. And now once we've created this, we should be able to enable our com thread, since now it has a sub address to actually run. So what we need to do first is create a listener loop. This is a loop that's just going to run over and over and over, keeping an eye out for new connections to the server, as well as reading data from those. So say create listener loop, and I'm going to say do until is listening equals false. So if we turn this off or set it to false, it should terminate our thread, or at least it'll terminate this loop and allow the thread to finish. So next up, we need to accept incoming connections. So we're going to say accept incoming connections, and what we'll do is we'll say if server dot pending, meaning that there are pending incoming connections, then client equals server dot accept client, accept TCP client. So we're setting this variable here. We're allowing a TCP client to be set or added to the server. So now we need to grab the data stream for that client. So I'm going to say client dot client data equals new StreamReader, and the stream that we want to read is the data stream from the client. So I'm going to say client dot get stream. Alright, so that should allow an incoming connection. And whenever you create a hard loop like this, where it just loops over and over again, it will seriously ramp up your CPU usage, because it just begins kind of binding up your CPU. What I do to reduce the CPU usage is to cause the thread to sleep for just a moment, very short time, so it should still be very responsive, but not complete so many loop cycles, thus consuming system resources. So what I'm going to do is reduce CPU usage by putting the thread to sleep briefly. So I'm going to say thread dot sleep, and I'm going to just make it sleep for 100 milliseconds. If you find that your server is slow and unresponsive, you can set this to a lower value, so it will complete more cycles more rapidly if it's missing connections or anything. But the higher that number, the fewer loops will complete in that time span. So that's how that works. Now, something we're going to want to do probably is have some sort of custom event raised when data is received, so we can actually relay information back to our form. And because our thread or our form controls like our text box and whatnot exist outside of that thread. The thread cannot talk directly to it, so I will show you in a moment how we can allow communication from an external thread like this one that we're running to communicate with this text box using a delegate sub. So let's go ahead and create an event. I know this is a network programming tutorial, but custom events can be very handy. So I'm going to say public event message received. Okay, and I want to relay the sender as the TCP control, and I also want to relay the data stream. So I'm going to relay data as a string. So I'm going to send a string, return a string whenever this event is fired, along with the control that sent it. So down here, we're going to want to add. We're gonna want to raise the event every time a new message comes in. So we're just gonna say. Actually, I'm going to throw this in a try catch because if this loop terminates before this cycle is completed and it tries to raise the event after it's been terminated, then it's going to throw an error. So I'm just going to use a try catch here, and I'm going to say raise event for incoming messages. Okay, and here's where I'll raise the event. Inside of the try, I'm going to say raise event message received, and we want to for the TCP control parameter of our event, we're just going to use the active instance of our TCP control class. So I'm just going to say me. Okay. And for the data, I'm going to say client data. That's our data stream that we set right here. Dot read line. So whatever line it's reading at that moment is what will be relayed through this event. And that's all there is to creating this server class. So all we have to do is go back to our main form and make use of this control class that we created. I'm going to go ahead and save my work. Now let's go ahead and double click on our form to generate a form load event. And first thing we need to do is create a new instance of our TCP control class. So what I will do is first that I will create a server as a TCP control. And in our form load event, we want to add server equals a new TCP control. Now when we say a new TCP control, that actually generates the instance, the new instance, and it automatically fires this new sub, thus initializing and starting the COM thread. And so first thing I will do is I will say txtchat.text equals, let's put something in here, server started. Now because we're not using a bunch of try-catch statements, we don't really have much error handling going on here. And again, I'm just kind of trying to make this as simple as possible. You can add error handling in yours if you like. It's probably always a good idea to do that. The next thing we have to do is add a handler for the event in our TCP control. So I'm going to, actually I'll probably need this another sub to address when I do this. But we can go ahead and add the line. Let's say add handler server dot message received. That's calling this event right here. It's adding a handler for this event right there. And the address of this handler will be a sub, much like our form load sub here is an event handler. We're going to create a new one called online received. Okay. Now it's not going to like that because we haven't actually created this sub yet, but we'll do that in just a moment. So if you want, you can comment that out until we get it, just so it's not throwing errors at you. Okay, so we will go ahead and create that sub now. We'll say private sub online received. And just like our form load event has a sender and its event args, we're going to have sender as a TCP control, and we want to receive in the data as a string. So data as string. Okay, and now we can get rid of this comment here. And as you can see, it's no longer throwing an error, it's happy. So when this event is fired, we need it to do something, and what I want that to be is a text update. Now this is kind of a twofold process here. As I stated before, an external thread cannot directly communicate with form controls because they exist in a different thread. Cross-threading will throw errors at you. So what we need is a delegate sub to safely hand off information to those form controls. So what we do is we create a delegate. We're going to say private delegate sub, and I'll call this update. Whoops. Update text delegate. Okay. And here we're going to specify in the parameters, we're going to specify the text box that we want to communicate with. So I'm just going to call this TB as text box. And for the data that we want to send through, the text from our string, I'm just going to call that txt as string. Okay, and you'll notice that no subcode is generated below that. There's no end sub like you see on a regular sub. These delegates are just kind of one-liners like that. So now we want to actually have a sub to update the text box using the text box's invoke method. So here we'll say update text box. I'm going to say private sub update text. And much like this delegate, I'm going to have a reference to our text box. So I'm going to say tb as text box, and the text as a string. Okay, and this is a regular sub. So now I have to check and see if invoke is required on that text box. I'll say if tb.invoke required, then tb.invoke, and what we will invoke is our delegate sub. So I will say new update text delegate, and then I have to set the address of the same sub that we're working in here. So I'm going to say update text. And then I send a new object being our text with the parameters of our text box and text. So it's sort of an object array. Say new object, and then we specify the parameters for that as the text box itself and our txt parameter for our data. And we put those in curly braces there, and then we have to end our sub, or end that invoke with a ending paren. Kind of crazy. So if the invoke is required, then invoke it. Otherwise, it's just a regular text update. We'll say if txt is not nothing. We don't want to send null values to our text box. So if our text value that comes through is not nothing, then tb.append text txt being our text, our data parameter, and I'm going to add in a line feed, so it doesn't add in all new incoming messages to the same line. So I'm just going to say vbcrlf. Alright, so hopefully this will verify whether an invoke is required on that text box coming from our delegate, and if so, invoke it and append the text to that text box. Okay. Now we're ready to fill in our online received event. So all I have to do here is say update text, and the text box that I want to update whenever information is received is txt chat from our main form. And make sure you don't put the .text property in there, because we're actually referencing the object itself. And the data from this parameter, whatever is passed through the event, is what we want to add to that text box. And that should be all we need for our server. Actually, another good thing to add is a closing event. You know, when the form is closed, to try to shut it down gracefully. So I'm going to come up to my form load here, grab my events for form 1, drop down, and do form closing. So when the form is closing, I'm going to say server.isListening equals false, which will break our loop in our form control right here. Let's go ahead and attempt to start the server. And it looks like it started up successfully. I didn't get any errors. If you do get some errors, or you know, things you might have to worry about are Windows firewalls, any other application firewalls or antivirus that may be blocking that port from starting up, or if you have another application running on the same port. And you should actually be able to bring up a command prompt, open up DOS, and do like a netstat -a, and that'll show you all of the running things, and you can look for your port number in that list, and you should be able to find the port that you specified running with this server. So in our case it would have been 64555. But you could also see if that port was in use by something else using a netstat -a like that. It's something to keep in mind. But you can't have two applications listening on the same port, so very important. And you also want to make sure that you know your computer's IP address, wherever the server is running from. And most of these settings you probably, in a real application, you're not going to be setting static values like this. You probably have, some sort of settings tab or form to pass in, desired server properties. And there are a whole lot more properties you can set depending on how complex your application is. Okay, but with that, we should be able to jump into creating our client to communicate and connect up to our server. So let's go ahead and get started on that. To create the client, I'm going to go ahead and open a new session of Visual Basic and create another project. And again, this is going to be a Windows Forms application, and I'm just going to call this one Client. You can call it TCP. I probably shouldn't call it TCP Client because that's an actual control name, but it'll go ahead and name it and generate your new project template. Actually, I'm going to shrink this down a little bit and try to keep it kind of small and very simple. I'm just going to add a few objects or controls to this form. Going to grab a couple of buttons and a simple text box, and this is going to be our chat client. So let's see, simple is good. Alright, and for this first button I'm going to be using that for our connection. So I'm going to just set the caption text on that to connect, and I will change the name of it to CMD, or command button connect for the name. And this is going to be our send button, so I'm just going to call this one CMD send and change the text caption to send. Alright, and for the message box, I'm going to set this to txt message for the name. And that's pretty simple. If you want, you can change your form text caption to something like client. You can do the same on your server, call it server or something. So for this guy, we're going to do something similar to the first and add a TCP control. So I'm going to right click on my project header and add a class, and I'm going to make this identical to the other. And I'm not going to make this a bidirectional chat where you can actually chat back from the server, though you could do that if you want, and I expect that's probably what you'll want to do in the future. But again, I'm trying to keep this short and sweet, so I'm not going to be adding a looped thread in this one like I did in the other one, because I'm not going to be receiving anything to the client, just sending from it. So I'm going to do imports system.net and imports system.net.sockets, and also the imports system.io for our data stream. And to keep this short and sweet, I'm going to just add a public client as TCP client, and this is the TCP client that will be added to our server upon connection. And again, we'll do our data stream as this time, instead of using a StreamReader, we're going to use a StreamWriter because we'll actually be writing data to that stream. So we'll say StreamWriter, and then we're going to create our initialization sub. So we'll say public sub new. In this one, we're going to add some parameters. I'm going to add a parameter for the host, which is going to be our server that we're connecting to, as a string. So there you can enter the host name or IP address of the machine that you are trying to connect to, or the server. And again, we'll add the port as an integer. And here we'll define our client, or initialize it. So we'll say client equals new TCPClient, and we will provide the oops, I gotta make sure that's a new. Have to create a new instance of your object, so say host and the port. Okay, so that tells it which server and port number to connect to. And our data stream, we will initialize as a new StreamWriter, and the stream that we want to write to is the client.getStream. And now we need a sub to send data through that stream with. So we're going to say public sub send. And what do we want to send? Well, we want to send data as a string. Okay. Now you can again, you know, speaking of the complexities of network programming, there are many different ways to handle these. You can use network streams, binary streams, and send all sorts of different data types, send it as bytes and other things. But again, we're trying to keep this as simple as possible, just to give you the idea of what you can do here. So when we send our data, we want to send the data stream, or use the write method of the data stream to send data from our parameter, whatever we supply, and VBCRLF. So send the data and a line feed afterward. And then once we're done, we want to flush that stream so we don't send redundant data. So we'll do datastream.flush. And now we are ready to go back to our main form, and we will double click on our connection button. And first thing I want to do is create a new instance of our TCP control, this time as a client. So I'm going to say private client as a TCP control, creating a new object of our class here. And then when we connect, we will initialize a new instance of that object, say client equals new TCP control. And when we create a new instance, it requires our two parameters, one being the host or the server that we're trying to connect to, and the other being the port. Now in my case, my server IP address is going to be the machine I'm working on here, and I know that my IP address is 10.0.253, and my port number that I want to connect to has to match whatever my server is running on. So again, that's going to be 64555 as we set in the server. So if nothing is blocking me, and I can access this IP address on this port, I should be able to connect. Again, firewalls will block you, or another thing that you might be concerned about is what if you want to send this across the internet somewhere out in the world? Well, you have to be able to specify an external IP address here rather than your internal network. You wouldn't be able to send to 10.00.253 on another network somewhere else out in the world unless the only way to do that is through port forwarding or NATing. So there's a lot of networking concerns there, things that you'll have to understand before you can try sending this, setting your server up out in the world somewhere. So very important stuff to know. But for an internal network, with no firewalls running locally that might block you, this should work just fine. Just to verify that a connection was successfully established to our server, I'm just going to do, since I'm not using any try-catch statements here like I probably should be, I'm just going to do client dot connecting to the public client in our TCP control class. I know that looks redundant. Excuse me. If it's connected, then I'm going to change the caption text on my connect button to connected, just some sort of verification that we successfully connected. So I'll say cmd connect dot text equals connected, just changing the text property on our button. Chances are if it fails to connect, it's going to throw an, crash our application, throw an error back at us, and that's, that can all be avoided with proper error management, exception handling with try-catch statements. What else do we want to do here? We could, I think that if we ran this, because my server is not running right now, kind of give you an idea of what it might look like if it crashes. No connection could be made because the target machine actively refused it. That means that the server is not listening on this port. There's no way to connect to it if it's not listening. So if we jump back into our server app, I don't know if we still have that up. Here's mine. If we run this, and if it's listening, so I'm going to set this up here, jump back to my client, and run this, and hit connect. It connected successfully. So we know that our connection is successful if the text changes on that button. So I have successfully connected to the open port that my server application was running on. Now, of course, I don't have any connection control. Again, in the interest of time, I have not set any connection management on this server application, something to tell us that it connected. You might have something pop up here that says, oh, client connected, or if you have a connection pool, you might say, oh, or multiple clients, or this, one guy connected and so this other guy, or so and so disconnected. And you get the idea. So as you can see, these are working properly, but now we want to actually know that we can send data across our network through that port. So next step, what we'll do is we'll close out of that and make sure you're back in your client setup here, and we will double click on our send button in that form and try to send some data through there. And this is surprisingly easy. All we have to do is, I'm just going to create a send message sub that I can use from various events on my form, whether I press the enter button in this field or click the send button. You may have various things that launch your send. So rather than duplicate that code over and over, you just have a single sub handle the sending of data. So I'm going to say private sub send message, and don't even need parameters because I'm sending directly from my text box. So I might check to see if the client is actually connected successfully, so it doesn't crash on us. Again, you could use try catch. This is just probably a more crude way of handling some errors. So I say if it's true, then client.send. So we're going to invoke the send method of our TCP client right here, which makes it very simple. And then we tell it what information to send through our stream, and that is just going to be whatever is in our message box. Well, that's pretty easy. So when we click our send button in our send event, all we have to do is invoke that send message sub that we created, and a couple other things we might want to do. Clear the text box when we're done, so the text doesn't remain in there and we have to wipe it out every time we write a message. So I say txtmessage.clear, and when you click the button, the send button, it automatically takes focus away from your text box, so it jumps out of there. So if you want to immediately start typing another message, you have to click back in the box, and that's annoying. So something you might do is just say txtmessage.focus. So it keeps your focus in that box, and you can just keep typing new messages. I've actually used I don't know if it was one of the really early versions of Google Talk or Yahoo or something. I remember one of them in their versions would actually not focus back on the message box. So every time you sent a message, you had to click back in the box to send another one. It was really irritating. Let's how about when we press the enter key? Sometimes you don't want to be irritated by having to even click a button to send your message. You might just want to hit enter and send, like most chat programs do. Well, to do that, you can use the key down event. You could say you could use key down or key press, I think, but with your TXT message object selected, we can select the key down event and get rid of that text changed, because you probably don't want to send the message every time a letter is pressed. That'd be really irritating. Probably flood out your server. We'll just say if E being the button, E dot key code. Oops, key code. If E dot key code equals enter, keys dot enter, then again invoke our send message. That's easy enough. So every time you press the enter key, it sends a message. Of course, in reality, if you had a bunch of people doing that, they could easily flood out your server, so you might want to have some sort of timer or connection control so they can't just flood or spam your server. Just things to consider when you're writing a network application. And finally, probably want a form closing event. So define the form closing like we did in our server, and get rid of that load event because we're not setting up anything on load. And here we'll want to say, if the client is still connected, again, client.client connected. If that's true, then client.datastream.close and client.client.close. Again, sorry for the redundancy there. That's just because we named our TCP control client, and also our TCP control has a property called client. So if you wanted to make that less redundant, you could change the name of the control in here. It's up to you. So I think that's pretty much ready to go. I guess we can go ahead and give it a try. So let's bring up our server again and go ahead and launch that. And then bring up our client app and launch that as well. Looks like they're both running. Now we will see if the client app will send data successfully through our port, if it'll connect, and then send data through the port to our server application. So say connect, connected successfully, and now we can attempt to send data. So I'm going to say this is a test, and I will hit my send button, and sure enough it sent it to the server. So now what if I hit let's see, welcome to VB Toolbox, and this time instead of hitting the send button I'm going to press enter. Now you notice it sent the message, but we did not set it to actually clear the text box when we sent it. So I can keep hitting enter and it keeps sending the message. I can spam my server. Awesomer. Alright. So there you have it. Of course we didn't set up a disconnect button or anything like that, but you get the idea, and I'm sure you can do that. Now I guess the real test at this point is, you know, sure, it looks good. I have a client and a server application, but what if we wanted to run this from another, you know, move our client to another computer on the network? Would I still be able to connect to this machine? Well, if the other machine on your network has access to the IP address of this machine, meaning it can ping it and see it, sure enough it should. So I'm going to attempt to copy my client over to another machine and see if this works. So bear with me here. I'm going to go ahead and close this down. Actually, I want my server to be running. And we'll just do this for fun. I have copied my client application over to my Minecraft machine that I have used as a SQL server in other tutorials. So hopefully that machine will be able to see this machine over the network. So I am going to run this and walk over there. I have another camera running. I'm not sure if I'll be able to splice these videos together, but I'll give it a shot. So just keep an eye on the screen here, and if I am able to successfully connect from that other machine, you should see the text I type up here. So I will be back shortly. I just got back to my desk, and sure enough it looks like it's working successfully. So you know that this is a completely functional network application. So I hope this has been helpful for all of you. Again, keep in mind this is only going to allow a single connection. So we're going to have to create some sort of collection to manage multiple client connections, and we may cover this in a future tutorial, taking off from this one hopefully, given the time. If you like this, give me a thumbs up, and I appreciate your subscriptions and for following VB Toolbox. I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. Thanks for coming along. Bye-bye.